please. Don't let him shoot me." In the middle of a crowded train station, when the first gunshot rang out, the entire crowd panicked and ran. Except for one little girl who stood frozen, tears filling her eyes as she looked toward a stranger in an expensive coat. He wasn't a cop. No one dared to call his name, and everyone knew he wasn't a good man. But then in the instant the second bullet came flying, he stepped forward. No thinking, no hesitation, using his own body to shield a child he had never met. Blood soaked through his shoulder. Her tiny hands clung tightly to him, like holding on to the last piece of hope in the world. And when it was all over, he disappeared. No name, no explanation, leaving behind a question that sent chills down everyone's spine. Why would a man who lives in darkness choose to save a nameless child with his own life? If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the quiet power of kindness, especially when no one else chooses to show it. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Which city and country are you in, and what time is it there right now? It's always amazing to see how stories like this connect people from all over the world. If moments like this remind you of the beauty of humanity, please like the video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more powerful stories that celebrate compassion, courage, and the simple acts of kindness that can change a life. October 2025, Newark, New Jersey. Late afternoon light slanted through the grimy glass canopy of the Newark Penn Station Path platform, turning the concrete floor into a patchwork of gold and shadow. Commuters surged in tired waves. Office workers loosening ties, students with backpacks sagging from textbooks, mothers dragging small children by the wrist. The air carried the familiar mix of diesel exhaust drifting up from the street level, burnt pretzels from a vendor cart, and the faint metallic tang of the tracks. Sarah Thompson clutched her daughter Lily's small hand so tightly the child's knuckles whitened. Sarah was 31 but looked closer to 45. Years of double shifts cleaning downtown offices had carved deep lines around her eyes and mouth. Her coat, thrift store wool threadbare at the elbows, hung loose on a frame that had long since given up holding any extra weight. Hunger had become a constant companion, quieter than the wind that rattled through the cracked windows of their one-room apartment in the Central Ward, but just as relentless. Tonight she had skipped lunch again so Lily could have the last half of a peanut butter sandwich. The girl, 9 years old, wore a faded pink hoodie, 2 sizes too big, and sneakers with soles worn to nothing. Her dark hair was pulled into uneven pigtails. Sarah had tied with rubber bands scavenged from the office trash. They were heading home after Sarah's shift ended early. The platform announcer droned about delays on the World Trade Center line. Lily tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, can we get hot chocolate if there's change?" Sarah forced a smile that never reached her eyes. "Maybe tomorrow, sweetheart. Let's just get home first." A sudden shout cut through the murmur of the crowd. Heads turned. Near the escalators, a man in a dark jacket pushed forward too fast, his right hand buried in his pocket. His eyes locked on a woman in a red scarf several yards ahead, Sarah's cousin Maria, who had foolishly agreed to testify against a local crew in a minor racketeering case. The gunman didn't care about mistakes. He raised his arm. The first shot cracked like a slammed door. Screams erupted. People dropped bags, phones, briefcases. A baby wailed. Maria stumbled, clutching her shoulder, blood blooming dark against the red fabric. Lily froze. Her small body went rigid beside Sarah, eyes wide, mouth open in silent shock. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. She yanked Lily behind a concrete pillar, pressing the child's face against her coat. "Don't look, baby. Don't look." But the gunman pivoted, scanning for escape or perhaps for witnesses. His gaze swept the platform and settled on Lily's bright pink hoodie, the only splash of color in the chaos. He leveled the pistol. Sarah's world narrowed to a single point, the black muzzle swinging toward her daughter. Then a blur of motion. A tall man in a charcoal overcoat cut through the scattering crowd with lethal precision. Fair-skinned, broad-shouldered, early 40s hair clipped short and silvering at the temples. Vincent Vinny Russo moved like someone who had long ago learned the exact geometry of violence. He didn't hesitate. His left arm hooked around Lily's waist, scooping her off her feet as though she weighed nothing. His right shoulder slammed into her, driving them both to the ground behind a bench. The second shot rang out. The bullet tore through Vinny's left shoulder instead of Lily's chest. He grunted once, low-controlled, but kept moving, rolling, so his body completely shielded the child. Blood soaked through the fine wool of his coat in seconds. The gunman fired again. Vinny's right hand flashed inside his coat. A single, precise report answered. The attacker jerked backward, weapon clattering to the tiles, then collapsed. Silence fell, broken only by distant sirens and the metallic echo of spent casings rolling across concrete. Vinny stayed down, breathing hard through clenched teeth. Lily trembled beneath him, small fists clutching his coat lapels. her face pressed against his chest. She could hear his heart hammering steady despite the wound. Blood dripped onto her hoodie in slow, warm drops. Sarah scrambled across the platform on hands and knees, coat flapping, tears already carving tracks through the grime on her cheeks. Lily, oh God, Lily. She reached them and dropped beside the stranger who had just saved her world. Her hands hovered, shaking, unsure whether to touch her daughter or the bleeding man. Thank you, please, Vinny. Lifted his head. Dinny? His eyes, ice blue, sharp with pain, and something deeper met hers for the briefest second. No words, just a flicker of recognition, as though he had seen that exact combination of terror and gratitude too many times before. Security guards pounded down the escalator. Commuters began to creep closer, phones raised. Vinny eased himself off Lily with careful movements, wincing as fresh blood pulsed from the exit wound in his back. He set the girl gently on the ground. Lily's arms stayed locked around his neck for one heartbeat longer before she let go. Sarah pulled her daughter into a crushing embrace. Are you hurt, baby? Are you hurt? Lily shook her head against her mother's shoulder, eyes huge and glassy. He took the bullet for me. Vinny rose slowly, one hand pressed to his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers, staining the cuff of his white dress shirt crimson. He glanced once at the dead gunman, once at the growing crowd, then turned toward the emergency stairs at the far end of the platform. Wait, Sarah's voice cracked. Please, your name. He paused at the stairwell door. For a moment, the station lights caught the hard lines of his face, guilt and remorse warring behind the mask of calm. Inside, something ancient and wounded twisted violently. Another child, almost lost another life he could not save in time years ago when his own wife died in a crossfire meant for him. The old scar tissue in his soul tore open anew. But he said nothing. He disappeared through the door just as the first police officers burst onto the platform. Sarah held Lily tighter, rocking her. The girl's small body shook with silent sobs. Sarah's own tears fell freely now, relief, terror, shame at how close they had come to losing everything, fury at a world that let men with guns walk among children on a Tuesday afternoon. In the stairwell, Vinny leaned against cold concrete, breath ragged. Blood dripped steadily onto the steps. He pressed harder against the wound, vision graying at the edges. But the pain in his shoulder was nothing compared to the deeper ache blooming in his chest. He had seen the child's face, Lily's face frozen in that instant before the shot. Seen the mother's desperate lunge. Seen himself reflected in their terror, the invisible man who moved through shadows, who buried guilt beneath power and wealth, who told himself every life he took or spared balanced the ledger of the ones he had failed. And now this girl, small, fragile, innocent, had looked at him not with fear but with something else. Gratitude. Trust. A crack in the armor he had worn for 8 long years. He forced himself upright. Sirens wailed closer. He had to move, disappear before questions started, before anyone connected the dots between the dead shooter and the Russo family name. But as he descended into the dim lower levels, one image burned behind his eyes, Lily's small hands clutching his coat, refusing to let go even after the danger passed. He did not know then that the bullet he had taken was only the beginning, that the child he had shielded would refuse to let him vanish back into the dark. That guilt, long buried, was rising again, fiercer, more insistent, demanding he finally face what he had spent a lifetime running from. Compassion. Responsibility. The possibility of redemption. Vinny Russo stepped out into the October evening, blood soaking through his coat, heart pounding with a violence he had not felt in years. And somewhere behind him on a crowded platform now swarming with flashing lights, a mother held her daughter and whispered over and over, "We're okay. We're okay." But both of them, mother and child, knew something had shifted forever. The evening after the shooting, rain began falling in cold, slanting sheets across Newark. Sarah Thompson stood under the inadequate shelter of a bus stop awning on Market Street, Lily pressed against her side. The girl's pink hoodie was still flecked with dried blood, Vinny's blood, and Sarah had not yet found the strength to wash it. She could not afford the laundromat tonight anyway. The $53.12 in her pocket represented rent money already spoken, for food already rationed, heat already turned down to 55 degrees in their single room. Lily had not spoken much since the platform. Every few minutes she lifted her head from Sarah's coat and scanned the passing cars as though expecting someone. Sarah's stomach twisted each time. She knew that look. It was the same look Lily had given the landlord last month when he stood in their doorway demanding the late payment, the same look she gave the school nurse who handed her a free breakfast voucher with pity in her eyes. They waited for the number 21 bus that would take them deeper into the central ward. Sarah's legs ached from standing all day, scrubbing marble floors in the Gateway Center. Her hands were cracked, and red nails bitten to the quick. She had not eaten since the single slice of bread at 6 that morning. Hunger clawed at her ribs like a living thing, but worse was the deeper ache, the memory of the stranger's body shielding her daughter, the wet heat of his blood on Lily's cheek, the way his eyes had met hers for one suspended second. blue, haunted, unreadable. The bus arrived in a hiss of brakes and diesel smoke. Sarah guided Lily aboard, paid the fare with trembling fingers, and found seats near the back. The windows were fogged. Outside streetlights smeared into yellow halos. Lily leaned her head against the glass, leaving a small, clear oval where her breath condensed and vanished. Mommy Lily's voice was very small. Yes, baby. He didn't run away because he was scared. He ran away because he didn't want us to know who he is. Sarah's throat closed. She stroked Lily's hair. Some people help, and then they disappear. That's just how it is sometimes. But she knew it was more than that. She had seen the expensive cut of his coat, the heavy gold watch glinting briefly under the platform lights, the way he moved like he owned the violence instead of fearing it. Men like that did not take bullets for strangers unless there was something they wanted in return, or unless they were trying to outrun something inside themselves. Across town in the ironbound section, Vincent Russo sat shirtless on the edge of a leather examination table in the private medical suite beneath his house. The room smelled of antiseptic and old money, dark wood paneling, recessed lighting, a locked cabinet containing enough prescription painkillers to stock a small hospital. His personal physician, Dr. Moretti, worked quickly and quietly, cleaning the through-and-through wound, stitching the entry and exit, administering antibiotics without asking unnecessary questions. Vinny stared at the opposite wall, where a single framed photograph hung a younger version of himself, standing beside a smiling woman with dark hair and laughing eyes. Maria. 8 years gone. Car bomb meant for him. She had been 6 months pregnant. The needle tugged at his skin. He did not flinch. You should be in a hospital, Moretti said for the 3rd time. No hospitals, no reports, no names. The doctor sighed and tied off the last suture. At least stay off your feet for 48 hours. No lifting. No business. Vinny gave a short, mirthless laugh. Business never waited. When Moretti left, Vinny rose slowly. Pain radiated from his shoulder in hot waves, but he welcomed it. Pain was honest. Pain kept the guilt at bay for a few seconds longer. He walked barefoot across heated marble to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Passaic River. Rain streaked the glass. Below, 2 black SUVs idled in the gated courtyard, engines running headlights, cutting pale cones through the downpour. His men, always watching, always waiting. He pressed his uninjured palm to the cold pane. The city glittered beyond the river, towers of glass and steel containers stacked like children's blocks at the port, distant sodium lights turning the water the color of old blood. And somewhere in that city was a child whose small hands had clung to his coat as though he were something worth holding on to. He closed his eyes. The memory struck like a blade between the ribs, Lily's face pressed to his chest, trusting, terrified, alive. Alive because he had moved faster than thought. Alive because for once he had been in the right place. The guilt that followed was immediate and savage. Why her, why now? He had spent 8 years building walls, money, power, silence, so no one could ever reach the hollow place Maria's death had carved inside him. He told himself the empire he controlled protected people, jobs for families who would otherwise starve, loans for businesses. The banks refused order in neighborhoods where chaos would otherwise reign. He told himself he was necessary. But tonight, he had seen necessity through a child's eyes, and it looked like blood on pink cotton. He turned away from the window. On the desk lay his phone, silent for once. No messages from the Albanians claiming responsibility. Not yet. They would come. They always did. He opened a drawer and removed a small velvet box. Inside rested a single gold locket Maria had worn every day. He had taken it from her neck in the morgue because he could not bear for it to be buried with her. He clicked it open. No photograph, just empty space where her picture should have been. He had never been able to replace it. His thumb brushed the smooth gold. Remorse rose in his throat like bile. He had failed Maria, failed the child she carried, failed himself. And now another child had looked at him without fear. He snapped the locket shut and returned it to the drawer. The next morning, Sarah woke to pounding on the apartment door. She had fallen asleep in the chair beside Lily's narrow mattress, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Her body felt like lead. She rose joints, protesting, and peered through the peephole. 2 men in dark jackets stood in the hallway. One held a clipboard. The other carried a black duffel bag. Sarah's heart dropped into her stomach. She opened the door, a crack chain still latched. Sarah Thompson, yes. Management sent us. Rent's 30 days past due. You've got until 5 o'clock today to pay in full or vacate. Sarah's mouth went dry. I spoke to Mr. Delgado last week. He said I could have until the end of the month, new policy. Cash or certified check. No exceptions. She glanced back at Lily, still asleep under the thin blanket. The radiator hissed uselessly. The room was barely warmer than the hallway. Please, she whispered. I get paid Friday. I can give you half now and the rest. The man with the clipboard shook his head. 5 o'clock. They left without another word. Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down until she sat on the cracked linoleum. Tears came hot and silent. She pressed both hands to her mouth so Lily would not hear. She had $312 hidden in a coffee can behind the sink. Rent was $950. The electric bill was 2 months behind. The food pantry had cut hours. She had applied for every assistance program in Essex County and been waitlisted on all of them. She thought of the man from the station, the way he had looked at her, not with pity, but with something raw and unguarded, as though he recognized her despair because he carried its mirror image inside himself. She hated that she was thinking of him. She hated more that part of her wished he had stayed. At 3:47 that afternoon, Sarah stood on the sidewalk outside their building with 2 black trash bags containing everything they owned. Lily clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit ears frayed from years of being held too tightly. Neighbors watched from windows. No one offered help. In this neighborhood, trouble was contagious. Sarah's knees trembled. She had nowhere to go. The shelter on Broad Street had a 6-week wait. The church basement was full. She felt the city pressing in cold wind slicing through her coat, hunger sharpening every thought to a painful edge. Then a black Escalade turned the corner and stopped at the curb. The rear window descended. Vincent Russo looked out at them. He wore a fresh charcoal suit, left arm in a discreet sling beneath the jacket. His face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes were steady. Sarah froze. Lily's small hand tightened on her mother's. Vinny spoke quietly. "Get in." Sarah shook her head. "We don't know you. You know I took a bullet for your daughter. That's more than most people in this city would do." Her voice cracked. "What do you want?" "Nothing." She laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "Nobody does anything for nothing." Vinny's gaze dropped to Lily. The girl stared back, unafraid now. Curious. Hopeful. Something inside Vinny fractured. He looked back at Sarah. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm telling you to get out of the rain before your daughter gets sick. I have a place. Warm. Safe. No strings." Sarah's heart hammered so hard she felt dizzy. Every instinct screamed to run. Every exhausted muscle begged to accept. Lily tugged her sleeve. "Mommy, he's the man who saved me." Sarah looked down at her daughter's face. Thin cheeks, huge eyes, lips blue from cold. She looked back at Vinny. In his eyes, she saw, not predator, not savior, just a man carrying wounds no amount of money could close. She unlatched the door. They climbed inside. The Escalade smelled of leather and faint cigar smoke. Heat enveloped them immediately, real heat, the kind Sarah had not felt in months. Lily sighed against the seat like a small animal finding its burrow. Vinny did not speak during the drive. Sarah sat rigid, clutching Lily's hand, every nerve, screaming that this was a mistake, that powerful men did not help women like her without wanting something unspeakable in return. But when they pulled into the gated courtyard of a brick townhouse on Ferry Street, when Vinny opened the door and offered his good hand to help Lily down, when the child placed her small palm in his without hesitation, Sarah felt the first tear fall. She did not wipe it away. Inside, the house was quiet and warm. Hardwood floors, soft lamps, the smell of fresh coffee. A woman in her 60s, housekeeper perhaps, appeared with blankets and hot chocolate for Lily. Vinny turned to Sarah. Upstairs. Second door on the right. 2 bedrooms. Bathroom. Everything you need. Sarah's voice was barely audible. Why, Vinny looked at her for a long moment. Guilt and longing and something close to terror warred across his features. Because 8 years ago I couldn't save the child who mattered most to me. Because yesterday your daughter looked at me like I was still worth saving. He turned away before she could answer. Sarah stood in the hallway listening to Lily's delighted gasp as she discovered a real bed with clean sheets. She pressed her forehead to the wall and let the sobs come silent, wrenching years of accumulated grief and shame and bone-deep exhaustion pouring out. She did not know if she could trust this man. But for the first time in years, someone had looked at her daughter and seen not a burden, not a statistic, but a child worth protecting. And that single fact tore through every defense Sarah had ever built. October 2025 wore on in Newark, with the stubborn chill of early autumn refusing to yield. Rain had given way to brittle wind that sliced through thin coats and rattled loose window panes in the central ward. Inside Vincent Russo's Ferry Street townhouse, however, the world felt suspended. Warm air circulated silently through hidden vents. Hardwood floors gleamed under soft lamplight, and the kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon from whatever, the housekeeper, Mrs. Elena, had left warming on the stove. Sarah Thompson stood in the doorway of the guest bedroom she and Lily had been given, arms wrapped tight around herself, as though the warmth might vanish if she let go. The room was larger than their entire apartment had been, 2 twin beds with thick quilts, a small desk, a dresser whose drawers still carried the clean scent of cedar blocks. Fresh towels folded in perfect squares waited on the bathroom counter. A nightlight shaped like a crescent moon glowed softly in the corner. Lily had fallen asleep almost instantly after her bath, small body curled beneath the covers like a comma, one hand still clutching the stuffed rabbit whose ears were now clean for the first time in months. Sarah had watched her daughter's breathing even out and felt something crack inside her chest, relief so sharp it hurt. She had not slept. She moved through the house like a ghost, barefoot on carpet that felt impossibly soft against calloused soles. Every room she passed whispered wealth she had only seen on television. Leather-bound books on shelves that reached the ceiling, framed artwork whose colors seemed to breathe, a grand piano in the parlor no one played. The disparity pressed against her ribs until she could scarcely draw breath. She found herself in the kitchen at 3 a.m, standing before the stainless steel refrigerator that hummed quietly like a sleeping animal. Inside were things she had not seen in years: whole milk in glass bottles, fresh fruit that had not begun to bruise eggs still in their carton, instead of cracked into a plastic container from the discount bin. Her hand hovered over a carton of orange juice, trembling. She closed the door without taking anything. Instead, she sank onto a stool at the island and pressed her palms flat against cool granite. Tears came again, silent, exhausted, the kind that had become routine over the last 3 years. She wept for the nights she had held Lily, while the radiator clanked uselessly and wind howled through cracks in the walls. She wept for the mornings she had smiled and said, "We're fine, baby," while her stomach twisted with hunger. She wept because kindness felt like a trap she could not afford to believe in. Across the house, in the study at the far end of the hall, Vincent Russo sat in near darkness. A single desk lamp cast a circle of gold across scattered papers, ledgers, contracts, coded messages from men who answered only to him. His left arm rested in a sling. The stitches pulled with every breath. He had refused the pain medication Moretti left. Pain kept his mind sharp. Pain reminded him why he could never let softness take root. He stared at the photograph on the desk, now a Polaroid taken in 1998, Maria laughing on the boardwalk in Asbury Park, hand resting on the small swell of her belly. He had carried that photo in his wallet for 8 years, folded and creased until the edges wore white. He had not looked at it in months. Tonight he could not look away. The child sleeping upstairs, Lily, had the same dark hair, the same trusting tilt to her head when she listened. When she had placed her small hand in his that afternoon on the sidewalk, something inside him had lurched violently, as though a rusted gate long padlocked had been kicked open. He hated it. He hated the way gratitude looked in Sarah's eyes, wary, wounded, desperate not to hope. He hated that he recognized it because he had worn the same expression after Maria died, the hollow certainty that nothing good could last. A soft sound from the hallway made him look up. Lily stood in the doorway in oversized borrowed pajamas, rabbit dangling from one hand. Her bare feet made no noise on the carpet. "You're awake," she said quietly. Vinny straightened, masking the jolt in his chest. "Shouldn't you be sleeping? I had a bad dream. About the man with the gun." She took one step inside. "Can I sit with you until it goes away?" He hesitated. Every instinct honed over 2 decades in the life screamed to send her back to bed, to keep the walls intact. Instead, he nodded once. She climbed onto the leather chair opposite him, knees drawn up, rabbit hugged to her chest. For several minutes neither spoke. The only sounds were the low tick of the mantel clock and the wind pressing against the windows. Finally, Lily whispered, "You didn't have to save me." Vinny's throat tightened. "Yes, I did." "Why?" He looked at her, really looked. Thin wrists, hollow cheeks, eyes too large for her face. A child who had already learned hunger as a constant companion. The sight struck him like a second bullet. "Because no one saved the little girl who used to live in my heart," he said, voice rough. "I won't make that mistake twice." Lily studied him for a long moment. Then she reached across the desk and placed her rabbit beside the photograph of Maria. "His name is Hoppy. He keeps bad dreams away. You can borrow him tonight if you want." Vinny stared at the worn toy. Something hot and jagged rose behind his eyes. He blinked it back. "Thank you," he managed. She slid off the chair. At the door she paused. "You're not invisible, you know. Not to me." Then she was gone. Vinny sat motionless for a long time after she left. The rabbit sat beside Maria's picture like a small, brave sentinel. He reached out and touched one frayed ear. Remorse surged so violently he nearly doubled over. He had built an empire on the belief that power could outrun grief. He had told himself every dollar, every favor, every quiet threat balanced the scales. But tonight a child had looked past the money, past the fear he inspired, and seen only a man who hurt. He rose, crossed to the window, and stared at the dark river. Somewhere out there, the Albanians were regrouping. Word of the shooting had spread. Retaliation was coming slow, careful, aimed where it would hurt most. He welcomed it. Pain was familiar. Pain he understood. This quiet trust from a child who should fear him, this was dangerous. The next morning, Sarah woke to sunlight slanting through curtains she had not drawn. Lily was already up, sitting cross-legged on the bed, counting the stripes on the quilt. "Mommy misses." Elena made pancakes, real ones, with blueberries. Sarah's stomach clenched, hunger, shame, disbelief. She dressed quickly in yesterday's clothes, which now felt even thinner against the luxury surrounding her. Downstairs, the kitchen table held plates of food. She could not remember the last time seeing golden pancakes, bacon crisp at the edges, fresh squeezed orange juice in actual glasses. "Mrs." Elena smiled gently and set another place. Sarah sat. Her hands shook so badly she could not hold the fork steady. Vinny entered from the hallway, dressed for the day in a dark suit that hid the sling. He nodded once to Sarah, then to Lily. "Good morning." Lily beamed. "Good morning. Hoppy helped you sleep, didn't he?" A flicker crossed Vinny's face, surprise, then something softer. "He did." Sarah watched the exchange with growing disorientation. Her daughter, her thin, wary, too old for her years daughter, was smiling at a man who carried death in his pockets. And he was smiling back. Panic rose sharp and sudden. She pushed back from the table. "We can't stay." Vinny's eyes met hers. Calm, unreadable. "You have nowhere else to go. I'll find somewhere. You'll find the street. Or a shelter with a 6-week wait. Lily deserves better." The words landed like blows. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, humiliation, fury, helpless gratitude. She hated him for saying it aloud, hated herself more for knowing he was right. Lily's small hand slipped into hers under the table. "Mommy, it's warm here, and there's food." Sarah looked down at her daughter's face, hope warring with the fear she had learned too young. Something inside Sarah tore wide open. She nodded once barely. Vinny exhaled a sound so quiet it might have been imagination. Later that afternoon, while Lily napped, Sarah stood at the parlor window, watching Vinny's men move through the courtyard like shadows. A black sedan pulled up. 2 men emerged, hard faces, expensive coats. One spoke low to Vinny. She could not hear the words, but she saw Vinny's posture change, shoulders squaring, jaw tightening. A moment later, he strode toward the street. Sarah moved without thinking, slipping out the side door and following at a distance. She watched from behind a brick pillar as Vinny faced 3 men on the sidewalk, Albanians, by the look of their tattoos and the cold arrogance in their stance. Words were exchanged, short, sharp. One of the men gestured toward the house. Vinny stepped forward, voice low but carrying. "You come near my street again, you won't leave it." The leader smiled, thin, dangerous. "Careful, Russo. You're playing house now. Makes a man soft." Vinny's laugh was ice. "Try me." The men backed away. Not far. Just enough to signal they would return. Sarah pressed herself against the brick, heart hammering. She had seen power before, petty, cruel, small. This was different. This was quiet certainty. The kind that reshaped the world around it. When Vinny turned back toward the house, he saw her. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he walked to her, slow, deliberate. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. "I needed to see who you really are." He looked at her, really looked. Saw the thin wrists, the hollow cheeks, the eyes that had learned too early that safety was temporary. "I'm not a good man, Sarah. I know. But I won't let anyone hurt her." The words hung between them. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Not suspicion now. Something hotter, more terrifying. Trust. She nodded once. Back inside, Lily woke from her nap and ran to the kitchen table, where a small stack of drawing paper and crayons waited gifts from Mrs. Elena. She began to draw immediately: a house, a tall man, a little girl holding his hand. She taped the finished picture to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a star. Vinny found it an hour later. He stood motionless before the crayon lines, stick figures, bright colors, impossible hope. Remorse rose again, sharper, now edged with something new. Longing. For a life he had buried. For a child who refused to let him stay buried. He touched the paper with one finger. And for the first time in 8 years, Vincent Russo allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he had lost and what he might yet find. October 2025 deepened in Newark. The wind off the Passaic River turned sharper each night, carrying the bite of coming winter through the cracked windows of forgotten tenements. Inside the Ferry Street townhouse, the temperature remained a steady 72 degrees, silent, steady, almost obscene in its comfort. Sarah Thompson had not yet grown accustomed to it. She still woke at 3 in the morning, expecting the radiator to clank and die, expecting the cold to crawl under the blankets like an unwelcome guest. Instead, she woke to warmth that felt stolen, undeserved, and terrifying. Lily had begun to bloom in small, heartbreaking ways. Color returned to her cheeks. She no longer counted bites of food as though each one might be the last. She laughed soft, tentative at Mrs. Elena's stories about growing up in the Ironbound. Sarah watched these changes with a mixture of joy and dread. Every smile her daughter gave felt borrowed against a debt she could never repay. That evening, Sarah stood at the kitchen sink rinsing a plate she had not allowed herself to leave dirty. The water ran hot enough to scald if she let it. She turned the faucet off quickly, as though the extravagance might summon someone to take it all away. Vinny entered from the hallway. He moved more stiffly now. The shoulder wound had begun to knit, but still pulled with every step. He wore a dark sweater over a white shirt, sleeves pushed to the elbows. The sling had been discarded 2 days earlier against doctor's orders. "You don't have to do that," he said quietly. Sarah kept her eyes on the sink. "I need to do something." He did not argue. He simply stood at the island watching her with that same unreadable gaze that made her feel seen and exposed at once. Lily's voice drifted down from the upstairs landing. "Mommy Hoppy wants to know if we can have hot chocolate again." Sarah managed a small smile. "In a minute, baby." Vinny spoke low. "Let her have it. There's more where that came from." Sarah's hands stilled under the water. She turned to face him. "You keep saying things like that, like it doesn't cost anything. It doesn't. To you." The words came out sharper than she intended. She regretted them instantly. Vinny did not flinch. "I know what it costs to accept help when you've learned it always comes with strings." Sarah looked away. Her throat burned. "I don't know how to be here. You don't have to know. Just stay." She met his eyes then. In them she saw not pity, not calculation, only a raw, unguarded ache that mirrored her own. For one suspended moment the room narrowed to the space between them, two people who had both learned too young that safety was temporary, that love could vanish in smoke and fire. Then the moment shattered. A low rumble grew outside engines, multiple approaching fast. Vinny's posture changed in an instant, shoulders squared, head tilting toward the sound like an animal scenting danger. He moved to the window, edged the curtain aside with one finger. 3 black SUVs rolled to a stop across the street. Doors opened. 5 men emerged, dark jackets, heavy boots, faces shadowed under hoods. One carried a metal gas can. Another held a short length of pipe. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. "What is that?" Vinny's voice was calm, too calm. "Albanians. They're sending a message." He turned to her. "Take Lily upstairs. Lock the bedroom door. Stay away from the windows." Sarah shook her head, panic rising like bile. "I'm not leaving you. You are." The command was quiet, absolute. "Now." She ran. Upstairs, Lily was already at the landing, eyes wide. Mommy Sarah scooped her up, carried her into the bedroom, locked the door. She pressed her back to the wood, Lily against her chest, both of them breathing too fast. Downstairs, Vinny stepped out the front door alone. The leader of the group, a broad man with a shaved head and a scar running from temple to jaw, smiled thinly. "Russo. Heard you're playing house now. Thought we'd warm the place up." Vinny stood motionless on the stoop. Rain began to fall again, light cold, hissing against the pavement. "You're on my street. That's a mistake." The scarred man laughed. "Your street. You think money and a fancy coat make it yours. We burn one house tonight. Tomorrow we burn another. Until you remember who you're dealing with." Vinny's voice remained even. "Walk away. Last chance." The man raised the gas can. Vinny moved. Not fast, not showy, just inevitable. He closed the distance in 3 strides, caught the scarred man's wrist as the can tilted twisted until the metal clattered to the ground. The other 4 men surged forward. Vinny pivoted once, twice, using momentum instead of strength. A palm strike to one throat, an elbow to another solar plexus. No weapons drawn, no blood spilled, just controlled surgical force that dropped 2 men gasping and sent the others staggering back. The scarred leader recovered first. He swung the pipe. Vinny ducked, caught the man's arm, wrenched it behind his back until the pipe fell. He leaned in close. "Tell your boss the next time he sends boys to my door they won't walk away." He released the man. The group retreated slowly, grudgingly into their vehicles. Engines roared. Taillights disappeared into the rain. Vinny stood on the stoop, breathing hard. Rain soaked his sweater, darkened the fabric over the healing wound. Pain flared fresh and hot, but he welcomed it. Pain grounded him. Inside, Sarah had heard the muffled sounds, thuds, low voices, the scrape of metal on concrete. She had pressed her ear to the door, heart in her throat, waiting for gunfire that never came. When the front door opened again, she flew down the stairs, Lily still in her arms. Vinny stood in the foyer, dripping face, pale but composed. Sarah set Lily down. The girl ran to him without hesitation, wrapped her arms around his waist. "You're wet," she said. Vinny managed a small, strained smile. "It's just rain." Sarah approached slowly. Her voice shook. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head. "No." She reached out, hesitant, trembling, and touched the wet fabric over his shoulder. Her fingers came away tinged pink, fresh blood seeping through the bandage. "You're bleeding again." "It's nothing. It's not nothing." Their eyes met. In that instant, Sarah saw everything. He tried to hide the guilt that never slept, the remorse that had carved hollows beneath his eyes. The violent war inside him between the man who built walls of power and the man who still mourned a child he could not save. And Vinny saw her thin, exhausted, trembling, yet standing there anyway. Not running, not begging, just seeing him. Something inside him gave way. He stepped back. "I need to change." Sarah followed him upstairs without asking permission. In the master bathroom, he peeled off the soaked sweater. The bandage was soaked crimson. She moved before she could think, grabbing clean gauze from the cabinet, warm water, antiseptic. "Sit," she said softly. He obeyed. She worked carefully, unwrapping the old dressing, cleaning the reopened wound. Her hands shook. Not from fear now. From the sheer weight of what she was doing, tending a wound on a man who could buy half the city yet who bled the same as anyone else. Vinny watched her face, concentration, gentleness, the faint tremble in her lips. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know." She pressed fresh gauze to the wound. He hissed once through clenched teeth. "Sorry, don't be." She taped the bandage in place. Her fingers lingered on his skin a moment longer than necessary. When she looked up, their faces were close enough to feel each other's breath. Neither moved. Sarah spoke, first voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you let them come here? Because if I'd gone to them, they'd have followed me back. You could have called the police." A bitter half smile. "Police don't solve problems like mine." She searched his eyes. "Then who does?" He looked away. "Men like me." The words hung heavy. Sarah stepped back. "I don't want Lily near that." "I know. But I don't want her on the street either." Vinny rose slowly. "She won't be." Sarah nodded once. Tears stood in her eyes again, not from shame this time, but from something fiercer. Gratitude so intense it felt like pain. Downstairs, Lily waited on the bottom step, Hoppy in her arms. When Vinny appeared, she ran to him again. "Did you win?" He knelt despite the pain. "I made them go away." She hugged him tight. "You're my favorite grown-up." Vinny closed his eyes. The words struck deeper than any bullet. Later, after Lily was asleep, Sarah stood in the hallway outside the girls' room. Vinny joined her. They did not speak for a long time. Finally, Sarah whispered, "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of believing this is real." Vinny looked at the closed door behind which Lily slept. "So am I." He turned to her. "But I won't let anyone take her from you. Or from me." The promise landed soft and absolute. Sarah felt the last wall inside her crumble, not with a crash, but with quiet, exhausted surrender. She reached out, slow trembling, and placed her hand over his on the banister. Neither spoke. They stood together in the warm hallway, two people who had both lost too much watching over the child who refused to let either of them disappear. Outside, the wind howled on. Inside, for the first time in years, silence felt like safety. October 2025 lingered in Newark like a held breath. The days grew shorter, the light thinner, and the wind carried the first sharp promise of frost. Inside the Ferry Street townhouse, the air remained soft and constant. Lamps glowed in every room, the furnace whispered through vents, and the kitchen always held the faint scent of something baking. Sarah Thompson still woke before dawn, body conditioned to cold and hunger, heart racing until she remembered where she was. She would lie still, listening to Lily's, even breathing from the next bed, and feel the old fear rise like bile. This warmth, this safety could vanish as quickly as it had appeared. Lily had begun to change in ways that broke Sarah's heart a little more each day. The girl no longer flinched at sudden noises. She asked for seconds at meals without lowering her eyes. She drew pictures of the house of Mrs. Elena, of Vinny, taping them to walls and doors, like flags of ownership. Sarah watched these small claims with a mixture of pride and terror. Every crayon line felt like a debt she could never repay. One afternoon, Sarah found herself alone in the parlor. Lily had gone upstairs with Mrs. Elena to help fold laundry, a task the housekeeper turned into a game with songs in Spanish. Sarah stood at the tall window overlooking the courtyard, arms wrapped tight around herself. Rain spattered the glass in irregular patterns. She had not eaten breakfast. The thought of taking food she had not earned still felt like theft. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, small, quick, hesitant. A boy appeared in the doorway. He was 9, same as Lily, but thinner, sharper around the edges. Dark hair fell across his forehead in uneven strands. His hoodie was faded, gray sleeves, two short cuffs frayed. Sneakers held together with duct tape. Eyes wary, watchful eyes that had learned too early to measure every adult for threat. Sarah recognized him instantly, Mateo Rivera, Lily's best friend from the old neighborhood. The boy who had once shared his single granola bar with Lily when Sarah could not afford lunch money. "Hi," Matteo said. His voice was low, careful. Sarah straightened. "Matteo, how did you? Lily told me where you were. Said it was okay to come." He shifted his weight. "I walked." Sarah's chest tightened. The distance from the central ward projects to the Ironbound was over 3 miles through streets where children did not walk alone. "Come in," she said softly. "You must be cold." He stepped inside but stayed near the door, hands shoved deep in his pockets. His gaze swept the room, high ceilings, leather furniture, the grand piano no one touched. Disbelief flickered across his face, quickly masked. Sarah moved to the kitchen. "Would you like something warm? Hot chocolate?" Matteo hesitated. "I'm okay. Please." He nodded once. She prepared 2 mugs, hands trembling slightly. When she returned, he was still standing as though sitting might commit him to staying. They sat at the island. Matteo wrapped small hands around the mug but did not drink. "Lily says you're safe here," he said finally. Sarah swallowed. "We're trying to be." He looked at her, really looked. "My grandma says men like him don't help for free." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I know." Matteo's voice dropped lower. "He's not like the others. But he's still him." Sarah understood. In their world, power always carried a price. Upstairs, Lily burst from her room. "Matteo." She ran down the stairs and threw her arms around him. Matteo stiffened for a heartbeat, then hugged her back, awkward, fierce. "You came, told you I would." Vinny appeared at the top of the stairs. He had been in his study, reviewing reports from men who watched the streets for him. He paused when he saw the boy. Lily turned beaming. "This is Matteo, my best friend." Vinny descended slowly. "Hello, Matteo." The boy straightened. His eyes narrowed, wary, assessing. "You're the one who got shot." Vinny nodded once. "I am." Matteo studied him. Why? Vinny met the child's gaze without flinching. "Because no one else did." Something shifted in Matteo's expression, small, almost imperceptible. Not trust. Not yet. But curiosity edged out hostility. Lily tugged Matteo's sleeve. "Come see my room. I have my own bed now. And crayons. Lots of crayons." Matteo glanced at Sarah for permission. She nodded. The children disappeared upstairs. Sarah turned to Vinny. He walked 3 miles. "In this cold," Vinny's jaw tightened. "I'll have someone drive him back." "No." Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "Let him stay a little while. He's Lily's only friend from before." Vinny studied her face, saw the plea beneath the words, let her keep one piece of the life she knew. He nodded. That evening, Matteo stayed for dinner. Mrs. Elena set an extra place without comment. The table held roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, simple food made rich with butter and care. Matteo stared at the plate as though it might disappear. Sarah watched him eat slow at first, then faster, as though afraid someone would take it away. Her own fork trembled. She remembered nights when she had given Lily the last of the cereal and pretended she was not hungry. After dinner, the children sat at the coffee table with crayons and paper. Lily drew a house with 4 stick figures. Matteo drew a dragon, sharp lines, fierce wings. Vinny sat in the armchair across from them, pretending to read a report on his tablet. He watched instead. Matteo glanced up once, twice. Finally, he spoke. "You really got shot for her." Vinny set the tablet aside. "Yes." Matteo's voice hardened. "Why? You don't know us." Vinny looked at Lily, who was coloring the dragon's scales red. "Because she looked like someone I couldn't save." Matteo's eyes narrowed. "Who? My wife," Vinny said quietly. "And the baby she carried." Silence fell thick, heavy. Lily stopped coloring. She crawled across the rug and climbed onto Vinny's lap without asking. He stiffened for a heartbeat, then let her settle against his chest. She pressed her small hand to his cheek. "You're sad a lot." Vinny closed his eyes. "Sometimes." Matteo watched. His own hands clenched into fists on his knees. He had seen men cry before drunks in the hallway, his mother before she went away, but never like this quiet, contained breaking anyway. Something cracked inside the boy. He stood, walked to Vinny, stood there a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "My grandma's sick. Real sick. Doctors say hospice, but we can't pay." Vinny opened his eyes. "I know." Matteo blinked. "You do," Lily told Mrs. Elena. "Mrs. Elena told me." Matteo swallowed. "She's all I got left." Vinny reached into his pocket, removed a plain white card, no name, only a phone number. He held it out. "Call this tomorrow. Ask for Dr. Moretti. Tell him Matteo sent you. Everything will be taken care of." Matteo stared at the card. His hand shook when he took it. "Why?" he asked again. Vinny looked at Lily, then at Mateo. Because no child should watch someone they love die because of money. Mateo's eyes filled. He blinked hard, turned away. Sarah watched from the doorway, tears streaming silently down her face. Later, after Mateo had been driven home by one of Vinny's men, Sarah found Vinny in the study. He stood at the window, staring at the dark river. She approached slowly. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She stopped beside him. "Thank you." He did not look at her. "Don't thank me." "I'm not doing it for thanks." "Then why?" He turned then. His face was raw guilt and longing and something close to terror. "Because every time Lily smiles at me, I see the child I lost. Because every time Mateo looks at me like I might hurt him, I remember what it felt like to be that boy hungry, scared, waiting for the next blow. Because I spent 8 years telling myself power would fill the hole Maria left. And it didn't." Sarah reached out. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, the uninjured one. "You're not invisible," she whispered. "Not to them. Not to me." Vinny exhaled a ragged sound. He covered her hand with his. For a long moment they stood like that, two people who had both learned despair too young, holding on to the fragile possibility of something better. Outside the wind howled. Inside the house held its breath. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, Vincent Russo felt the first real crack in the armor he had worn for so long. Not a break. A beginning. Newark, with relentless gray skies, and a wind that seemed to carry the weight of every unpaid bill, every missed meal, every night spent shivering under thin blankets. The Ferry Street townhouse stood as an island of warmth and light in the gathering dark crystal chandeliers that never flickered, fireplaces that burned clean cedar logs, rooms so quiet the only sound was the soft tick of antique clocks. Sarah Thompson moved through these spaces, like someone walking on glass, afraid that one wrong step would shatter everything. Lily had begun to sleep through the nights. No more waking at 2 a.m, crying from hunger dreams. No more pressing her small body against Sarah's for warmth that was never enough. Sarah watched her daughter curl beneath thick quilts and felt gratitude so fierce it bordered on pain. Every peaceful breath Lily took felt like evidence of a debt Sarah could never repay. She had started to help Mrs. Elena in small ways, folding laundry, wiping counters, anything to feel less like a guest and more like someone who belonged. Each task reminded her how foreign these motions were, the luxury of time, the absence of desperation. Her hands, once cracked and bleeding from bleach and cold water, began to heal. The skin softened. The nails grew. She caught herself staring at them, sometimes bewildered, as though they belonged to someone else. Vinny watched her from doorways from across rooms, never close enough to intrude, never far enough to disappear. He moved through his days with the same quiet precision, phone calls in low tones, meetings in shadowed corners of the city men, who nodded once and vanished into the streets. But his eyes always returned to the house, to the child who now greeted him with Vinny. Instead of silence, to the woman who met his gaze without flinching. The Albanians had gone quiet. Too quiet. Vinny knew the silence for what it was, preparation. He doubled the men on the perimeter. He changed routes. He slept with one eye open. Sarah felt the tension in him like a current running beneath still water. She saw it in the way his jaw tightened when his phone buzzed, in the way he scanned every window before stepping outside. She wanted to ask. She did not. One evening she found him in the study, staring at an old photograph on his desk. Maria, young, laughing, hand on her belly. Sarah paused in the doorway. "She was beautiful," Sarah said softly. Vinny did not startle. He simply nodded. "She was." Sarah stepped closer. "Lily reminds you of her. Every day." The admission hung between them, raw, unguarded. Sarah spoke before she could stop herself. "I never told you about Lily's father." Vinny looked up. Something in his expression shifted, wary, almost afraid. Sarah's voice trembled. "It was 10 years ago. One night. A bar in the Ironbound. I was 19. Broke. Scared. He was kind. For one night. Then he was gone. I never looked for him. I didn't want this life for her." Vinny's hand tightened on the edge of the desk. His knuckles whitened. Sarah continued, words spilling, now unstoppable. "She has his eyes. The same blue. The same way they go quiet when he's thinking too hard. I see it every time she looks at you." Vinny rose slowly. The room seemed to shrink around them. "Sarah." She met his gaze. Tears stood in her eyes. "She's yours, Vinny. Lily is your daughter." The words landed like a physical blow. Vinny staggered back one step. His face drained of color. For a moment he looked like a man who had been shot again, this time through the heart. He reached out blindly, found the desk, steadied himself. "How long have you known?" His voice was hoarse. "From the beginning. The night at the station. I saw your face. I knew. And you didn't tell me. I was terrified. You, and I'm... She gestured helplessly at herself, at the thin frame, still carrying the ghosts of hunger, the hands still marked by years of labor. I didn't want her in your world. I didn't want her to lose you the way I lost everyone else. Vinny closed his eyes. Remorse surged through him, vicious, unrelenting. 8 years of absence. 8 years of her raising their child alone, cold, hungry, afraid. 8 years he could never reclaim. He opened his eyes. They were wet. I failed her, he whispered. I failed you both. Sarah stepped forward. You saved her. That night on the platform, you didn't know who she was and you still took the bullet. Vinny shook his head. It's not enough. It's everything. They stood inches apart. Neither touched the other. The space between them crackled with unspoken grief, unspoken longing, unspoken possibility. Downstairs, the front door opened. Mrs. Elena's voice carried up, soft, urgent. Mr. Russo. They're here. Vinny straightened instantly. The mask slipped back into place, cold, controlled, lethal. He looked at Sarah. Stay with Lily. Lock the doors. Sarah's heart lurched. What's happening, Albanians? They know. He moved past her, swift, purposeful. Sarah ran to Lily's room. The girl was already awake, sitting up in bed with Hoppy clutched to her chest. Mommy Sarah gathered her close. It's okay, baby. Stay here. Through the window, she saw them 4 black SUVs blocking both ends of the street. Men stepping out armed, but not openly. This was not a shooting war. This was a message. Vinny walked out alone. The leader, this one taller, leaner, with a scar across his throat, stepped forward. Russo. Word travels fast. You got a kid now. A daughter. Vinny's voice carried across the cold night air. You threaten her, you don't leave this street. The man smiled. We don't want blood tonight. Just a conversation. Step aside. Let us see the girl. Vinny's laugh was low, dangerous. You'll see me first. The man gestured. 2 of his men moved forward. Vinny met them halfway. No guns, no blades, just bodies colliding in controlled violence. Vinny caught the first man's wrist twisted, forced him to his knees. The second swung. Vinny ducked, drove an elbow into ribs, followed with a knee to the gut. The men dropped without a sound. The leader raised both hands, mock surrender. Enough. We're not here to die tonight. Vinny stepped closer. Then leave. We will. But know this, secrets don't stay secret in this city. Your little family, they're visible now. Vinny's voice dropped to a whisper only the leader could hear. Touch them and I burn everything you have. Every warehouse. Every cousin. Every safe house. I will leave you nothing. The man studied him, saw the truth in his eyes. He nodded once. The SUVs pulled away. Vinny stood in the street until the taillights vanished. Rain began again, cold, relentless. Inside, Sarah had watched from the upstairs window, Lily pressed against her side. When Vinny returned, soaked and bleeding anew from the shoulder, Sarah met him at the door with a towel and fresh bandages. He looked at her exhausted, raw, undone. She's mine, he said again, as though testing the words. Sarah nodded. Tears fell freely now. Vinny sank to his knees in the foyer. Sarah knelt with him. He reached out, slow trembling, and placed his hand over hers. I won't fail her again, he whispered. Sarah covered his hand with her other one. I believe you. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs, Hoppy dangling from one hand. Vinny. He looked up. Tears tracked down his face, silent, unashamed. Come here, baby girl. Lily ran down, threw herself into his arms. Vinny held her, careful of his wound, careful of her smallness, careful of everything he had almost lost before he even knew he had it. Sarah watched them, father and daughter, finally touching, and felt the last of her fear dissolve, not into certainty, into something stronger. Hope. Outside, the rain fell harder. Inside, a family began quietly, painfully, irrevocably. Newark under a sky the color of old steel. The last leaves had been torn from the trees by wind that never seemed to rest, and the streets carried the wet, metallic smell of coming winter. Inside the Ferry Street townhouse, the contrast was almost cruel. Fires burned low in every hearth, thick rugs muffled every footfall, and the air held the faint sweetness of cinnamon from bread. Mrs. Elena, baked each morning. Sarah Thompson still woke before dawn, body braced for cold that never arrived, heart braced for the moment this warmth would be taken away. Lily had begun calling Vinny Dad in small testing whispers when she thought no one else could hear, when she handed him a drawing, when she climbed onto his lap after dinner and pressed her cheek to his shoulder. Each time she said it, Sarah felt something inside her fracture and mend at once. She watched her daughter bloom cheeks, rounding eyes brighter, laughter coming easier, and knew the price of every smile was paid in Vinny's quiet, constant vigilance. Vinny had not slept more than 3 hours at a stretch since the night he learned the truth. He moved through his days like a man carrying live ordnance phone calls and code meetings in empty warehouses, eyes always scanning for the next move from the Albanians. The silence from their side had stretched too long. He knew what it meant. He had begun teaching Lily small things: how to tie a knot, how to listen to the street outside, how to breathe slow when fear came. Not to frighten her, to arm her with calm. Each lesson tore at him. He was giving his daughter tools he had learned in places no child should ever need them. One afternoon, Sarah found him in the backyard garden, rarely used, overgrown with ivy, showing Lily how to plant tulip bulbs in the cold earth. His good hand guided hers, gentle, patient. Sarah watched from the kitchen window, arms wrapped tight around herself. The sight pierced her, a man who commanded fear in half the city, kneeling in dirt to teach a child about spring. Lily looked up, saw her mother, and waved. "Mommy, Dad says these will be read next year." Sarah managed a smile. Her throat ached. That evening the call came. Vinny answered in the study. His face changed, stone hardening over something raw. He found Sarah in the parlor. "They have Matteo," he said quietly. Sarah felt the floor tilt. "What, his grandmother's apartment?" "They took him an hour ago. Left a message for me." Sarah's knees buckled. She caught the back of a chair. "Why Matteo?" "Because they know he matters to Lily. Because they know Lily matters to me." The words landed like stones in still water. Sarah's voice cracked. "We have to go. Now." Vinny caught her arms steady, careful. "You stay here. Lock everything. Mrs. Elena will stay with you and Lily." "No." Sarah pulled away. "He's Lily's best friend. He walked 3 miles in the rain to see her. I'm not staying behind." While Vinny's eyes met hers, fierce, pleading. "If something happens to you, Lily loses everything." "I can't." His voice broke. "I can't lose you both." Sarah stared at him. Saw the terror beneath the control, the man who had built walls of power, now terrified of losing what he had only just found. She nodded once, small trembling. Vinny left without another word. The warehouse near Port Newark smelled of salt, diesel, and rust. Floodlights cast long shadows across stacked containers. Rain drummed on metal roofs. Vinny walked in alone. 4 men waited, Albanians' faces, hard weapons holstered but ready. In the center, Matteo sat tied to a chair, small, bruised eyes wide but defiant. The leader stepped forward. "Russo, you came." Vinny's voice was calm. "Let the boy go." "Not yet. First we talk terms." Vinny glanced at Matteo. The boy's lip trembled, but he did not cry. "You want territory," Vinny said. "You want the docks. You want me weak." The leader smiled. "We want you gone." Vinny took 1 step closer. "Then take me. Leave the child." The leader laughed. "You think it's that easy?" Vinny's eyes never left Matteo. "It can be." Silence stretched, rain drumming, wind moaning through gaps in the walls. The leader nodded to one of his men. The man drew a knife. Matteo whimpered once, small, terrified. Vinny moved. He crossed the space in 3 strides, fast, silent. He caught the knife, arm twisted until bone cracked. The man screamed. Vinny drove a knee into his midsection, dropped him. The others surged. Vinny fought like a man protecting something sacred, not with rage but with terrible precision. A fist to a throat, an elbow to a temple, a sweep to take legs from under another. No guns fired, no blood sprayed, just bodies falling, groaning. The leader drew his weapon. Vinny reached him, first caught the wrist, forced the barrel upward. The shot went into the roof. Sparks rained. Vinny wrenched the gun, free, tossed it aside. He drove the leader back against a container, forearm across the throat. "Let the boy go," the leader gasped. "You'll never." Vinny pressed harder. "Last chance." The leader nodded frantically. Vinny released him. The man stumbled back, gestured to the last standing thug. They untied Matteo. The boy ran straight to Vinny. Vinny caught him, lifted him against his chest. Matteo buried his face in Vinny's coat, shaking. Vinny held him tight. "You're safe. I've got you." The leader backed toward the door. "This isn't over, Russo." Vinny looked at him over Matteo's head. "It is for tonight." They left, limping, bleeding, defeated for now. Vinny carried Matteo to the car. The boy clung like he would never let go. Back at the house, Sarah waited at the door, pale, trembling. When she saw Matteo, she sobbed once, sharp, relieved. Vinny set the boy down gently. Matteo ran to Sarah. She knelt, held him tight. Lily appeared at the top of the stairs. "Matteo," she flew down. The children collided in a hug. Sarah looked up at Vinny. He stood in the doorway, coat torn, fresh blood on his shirt, eyes burning with something beyond exhaustion. Sarah rose, walked to him. She reached up, slow, trembling, and touched his cheek. "You brought him back." Vinny closed his eyes. "I had to." She stepped closer. "You're bleeding again." It doesn't matter. It matters to us. Vinny opened his eyes. Tears stood in them, silent, unashamed. Sarah wrapped her arms around him, careful of the wounds, careful of everything fragile between them. Vinny held her gentle, fierce, as though she might vanish. Behind them, Lily and Mateo clung to each other, whispering promises only children can make. Sarah spoke against Vinny's chest. She's yours. And now? So are we. Vinny exhaled a ragged, broken sound. He buried his face in her hair. I won't fail you, he whispered. Not again. Never again. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the city clean for one night. Inside, 4 hearts beat in the same small space, wounded healing finally together. And in the quiet between breaths, Vincent Russo felt the last of his walls dissolve, not into weakness, but into something stronger. Love. Not the kind that demanded. The kind that protected. The kind that stayed. Newark with a cold that seemed to settle into the bones of the city itself. The streets outside the Ferry Street townhouse grew quieter after dark, the kind of quiet that felt watchful rather than peaceful. Inside the house remained a cocoon of warmth, fires crackling low in every hearth, soft lamps casting golden pools across polished floors, the faint scent of cedar and cinnamon lingering in every room. Sarah Thompson still woke before dawn, body conditioned to expect the bite of frost and the gnaw of hunger that had defined so many years. Each morning she lay still for several long minutes, listening to Lily's gentle breathing from the next bed, waiting for the illusion to shatter. It never did. Lily had begun to leave small offerings for Vinny. Crayon drawings slipped under his study door. A single daisy from the garden pressed between the pages of a book he was reading. Hoppy placed carefully on the arm of his chair when she thought he needed company. Each gesture pierced Sarah like a needle. She watched her daughter claim this man as father with the same quiet determination she had once used to claim the last bite of bread, and the sight filled Sarah with equal parts joy and terror. Joy because Lily had never known safety like this. Terror because Sarah still remembered too clearly what it felt like to have safety ripped away. Vinny carried the weight of the truth like a second skin. Every time Lily called him dad, soft testing, hopeful remorse surged through him so violently he sometimes had to step outside into the cold just to breathe. He had missed 9 years of her life. 9 years of scraped knees, nightmares, first days of school nights when Sarah had held her while the wind howled through cracked windows. 9 years he could never reclaim. The guilt was a living thing inside him, gnawing, relentless, waking him in the small hours with visions of Maria's face superimposed over Lily's. He had tightened security around the house without telling Sarah the full extent. More men on the perimeter, cameras at every corner. Routes changed daily. He told himself it was enough. It was not. The betrayal came on a Tuesday evening, when the sky was the color of bruised metal, and rain threatened but refused to fall. Vinny was in the study reviewing reports when his phone buzzed once sharp an emergency code only 3 people knew. He answered immediately. The voice on the other end belonged to Dominic, his second-in-command for 12 years, the man who had stood beside him through every war, every truce, every loss. Boss, we've got a problem. Albanian crew hit the warehouse on Tyler Street. They're holding Mateo again. They want you there, alone. Vinny felt the room tilt. Mateo is upstairs with Lily. A pause too long. No, Dominic said quietly. He isn't. Vinny was already moving out of the study, down the hall, up the stairs, 2 at a time. Lily's bedroom door stood open. Empty. Hoppy lay abandoned on the floor. Sarah appeared behind him, face white. Vinny, where is she? He did not answer. He could not. The roar in his ears drowned everything. He turned to Dominic, who had arrived at the front door, breathless. How long? Vinny asked. 20 minutes. Maybe less. They came through the service alley. Someone cut the cameras. Vinny's gaze locked on Dominic's face. Saw the flicker small, almost invisible. Guilt. The realization struck like a second bullet. You, Vinny said. Voice low. Deadly calm. Dominic took 1 step back. Boss Vinny closed the distance in an instant. His good hand caught Dominic's throat, not choking, just holding. Enough pressure to remind. Why? Dominic's eyes filled. They offered 3 times what you pay. Said they'd leave the city after this. I thought if you stepped down, the war would end. I thought I was saving us. Vinny's hand tightened. You sold my daughter. Dominic choked. I didn't know it was your daughter. Not until tonight. Vinny released him. Dominic dropped to his knees. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, 1 hand pressed to her mouth. Vinny looked at her. Stay here. Lock every door. Mrs. Elena will stay with you. Sarah shook her head. Tears streamed down her face. No, she's my daughter. Our daughter. Vinny crossed to her, cupped her face gently. If anything happens to me, you take her and you run. Promise me. Sarah's voice broke. I can't lose you both. Vinny pressed his forehead to hers. You won't. He kissed her forehead soft, brief, searing. Then he was gone. The warehouse on Tyler Street smelled of motor oil and salt water. Floodlights buzzed overhead. Containers loomed like silent witnesses. Vinny walked in alone. 5 men waited. In the center, Mateo and Lily sat back to back on the concrete floor, wrists bound, mouths taped, eyes wide with terror. Lily saw him first. Tears spilled over the tape. Vinny's heart tore open. The leader stepped forward, same scarred throat from before. Russo. You came. Vinny's voice was ice. Let them go. Not yet. First you kneel. Vinny looked at Lily, saw the fear in her eyes and beneath it trust. Absolute. Unshakable. He knelt. The leader laughed. Look at that. The great Vinny Russo on his knees. Vinny kept his eyes on Lily. Let them walk out. Take me instead. The leader gestured. One man cut the ropes. Mateo and Lily scrambled to their feet. Go, Vinny said softly. Run to the car outside. Don't stop. Lily shook her head. Tears streamed. Not without you. Vinny's voice cracked. Please, baby girl. Go. The leader raised his weapon. Vinny moved. He surged upward, fast, lethal. Caught the leader's wrist twisted until the gun clattered away. Drove an elbow into the man's throat. Dropped him gasping. The others rushed. Vinny fought like a man with nothing left to lose because he had everything left to lose. A palm strike to one temple. A knee to another gut. A sweep to take legs from under a third. No guns, no blades, just controlled fury. He reached the children, cut their remaining bonds with a knife taken from the floor. Go, he ordered again. This time Lily obeyed, grabbing Mateo's hand, running for the open door. Vinny turned back to the last man standing. The man raised his hands. Enough. We're done. Vinny stepped closer. Tell your boss the war ends tonight. Or I end it. The man nodded frantically. Vinny let him run. He stood alone in the warehouse, breathing hard, fresh blood seeping through his shirt. Then he heard its small footsteps. Lily ran back inside alone. She threw herself against him. Vinny caught her, sank to his knees. Held her so tightly she gasped. I couldn't leave you, she sobbed. I couldn't. Vinny buried his face in her hair. Tears fell freely now, hot, silent, unstoppable. I'm here, he whispered. I'm here. Outside, Sarah waited in the car with Mateo, hands shaking, eyes fixed on the warehouse door. When Vinny emerged carrying Lily, Sarah ran to them. She took Lily from his arms, held her close. Then she looked at Vinny, bloodied, exhausted, undone. She reached out, pulled him into the embrace. 3 bodies pressed together in the cold night air, father, mother, daughter. Mateo stood beside them, small and fierce. Vinny looked down at the boy. You okay? Mateo nodded. Tears streaked his face. You came for me too. Vinny placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Always. They drove home in silence. Inside the house, Sarah cleaned Vinny's wounds again, hands steady now certain. Lily sat beside him, holding his good hand. Mateo sat on the floor, Hoppy in his lap. When the last bandage was taped, Sarah looked at Vinny. We're not running, she said quietly. Vinny met her gaze. No, we're not. He looked at Lily, at Mateo, at Sarah. I'm done, he said. The life, the power, all of it. Tomorrow I start handing it off. Clean, legal, whatever it takes. Sarah's eyes filled. You don't have to, I do. His voice broke. For her, for you, for him. He looked at Mateo. The boy stared back, wary, hopeful. Vinny reached out. Mateo took his hand. 4 hands clasped together, small, large, trembling, steady. Outside, the wind howled on. Inside, a family broken, mended, unbreakable began. And in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, Vincent Russo felt the deepest wound of all finally begin to close. Not because the pain had vanished, but because love had grown larger than the pain, newark like a heavy curtain drawn against the light. The last week of the month brought frost that rimed the edges of windows and turned every breath visible in the pre-dawn dark. Inside the Ferry Street townhouse, the contrast remained almost violent, radiant heat moving silently through hidden ducts. Fires banked low but steady, the scent of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls drifting from the kitchen before sunrise. Sarah Thompson still woke in the small hours, body braced for cold that never came. Heart braced for the moment the warmth would prove temporary. She would lie motionless, listening to Lily's soft breathing from the next bed, counting each inhale and exhale as though they were fragile treasures that might vanish if she looked away too long. Lily had grown bolder in small, luminous ways. She no longer ate every bite as though it might be her last. She asked for seconds without dropping her eyes. She left crayon notes for Vinny on his pillow. "Dad, don't be sad today," and tucked Hoppy under his arm when he fell asleep in the armchair. Each gesture carved deeper into Sarah's chest. She watched her daughter claim this life with the same fierce quiet she had once used to claim the last scrap of bread, and the sight filled Sarah with gratitude so sharp it drew blood. Vinny carried the knowledge of his daughter like an open wound that refused to close. Every time Lily called him Dad, soft, certain, trusting remorse surged through him with such force he sometimes had to step outside into the frost just to breathe. He had missed 9 years of her life. 9 years of fevers in the night, of small hands reaching for comfort. He had not been there to give of Sarah, holding her alone, while the wind screamed through cracked windows. The guilt was a living thing inside him, relentless, clawing, waking him with visions of Maria's face overlaid on Lily's, asking why he had not come sooner. He had begun the slow, dangerous work of disentangling himself from the life. Quiet meetings in empty warehouses, handing territories to men he trusted to keep the peace. Promises of clean money, legitimate contracts, no more blood. Each step felt like walking across broken glass. Every piece of power surrendered left him more exposed, more vulnerable. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself it was enough. It was not. The warehouse rescue had left wounds deeper than the ones that showed. Vinny's shoulder had reopened twice since that night. The stitches strained every time he lifted Lily, or carried groceries, or simply reached for a book on the high shelf. He hid the pain behind careful movements and long sleeves. Sarah noticed her eyes, always noticed, but he brushed it aside with the same quiet deflection he had used for years to keep people at arm's length. Lily noticed too. She had seen the blood on his shirt that night. She had seen the way he winced when he thought no one was looking. She had heard him breathing hard in the dark when he thought the house was asleep. She said nothing. But children see what adults try to hide. 3 days after the warehouse, Sarah found Lily sitting alone on the back stairs leading to the garden. The girl's knees were drawn up, Hoppy clutched tight. Her face was pale, too pale. Sarah knelt beside her. "Baby, what's wrong?" Lily looked up. Tears stood in her eyes but did not fall. "I didn't want to tell you," she whispered. "I didn't want Dad to worry more." Sarah's heart stuttered. "Tell me what, sweetheart." Lily lifted the hem of her sweater. A bandage, crudely wrapped with strips torn from an old t-shirt, covered her left side. Dark stains had seeped through. Sarah's breath stopped. "Lily, I got cut," Lily said in a small, matter-of-fact voice. "When the metal fell in the warehouse, I was trying to cover Mateo. I didn't want Dad to know. He was already bleeding so much." Sarah's hands shook as she lifted the makeshift dressing. A deep gash, 4 inches long, edges inflamed, ran along Lily's ribs. Red streaks radiated outward. Infection. Bad. Sarah felt the world narrow to a single point of horror. She gathered Lily close, careful, so careful, and carried her inside. Vinny found them in the master bathroom. Sarah had Lily sitting on the counter, sweater off, tears streaming silently down the girl's face as Sarah cleaned the wound with shaking hands. Vinny stopped in the doorway. One look at Lily's side and the color drained from his face. He crossed the room in 2 strides. Baby girl Lily looked up. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't want you to be sad." Vinny sank to his knees in front of her. His hands hovered, afraid to touch, afraid not to. Sarah's voice cracked. "She hid it. For 3 days. She hid it so you wouldn't worry." Vinny closed his eyes. Tears slipped free, silent, unstoppable. He reached out, slow, trembling, and placed his palm gently over the wound. As though he could absorb the pain through sheer will, Lily leaned forward, pressed her forehead to his. "I'm okay," she whispered. "You saved me. You always save me." Vinny shook his head. "Not this time." He looked at Sarah. "Hospital. Now." They moved fast, Vinny carrying Lily wrapped in a blanket, Sarah beside him clutching Hoppy Missus, Elena already calling ahead to a private clinic. Vinny kept on retainer. In the car, Lily grew feverish. Her small body burned against Vinny's chest. She shivered despite the heat blasting from the vents. Sarah held her hand. Tears fell without sound. At the clinic, the doctor took one look at the wound and the spreading red streaks and spoke in clipped, urgent tones. "Septic. She needs surgery. Drainage. Antibiotics. And blood she's lost more than we can replace with fluids alone. Rare type, AB negative." Vinny's head snapped up. "I'm AB negative." The doctor nodded. "You're the only immediate match in the building, but you're still healing from your own wound. The blood loss, take it," Vinny said, voice flat. "Absolute. Take whatever she needs." Sarah reached for his hand. "Vinny," he looked at her. "She's my daughter. If she needs it all, she can have it." They prepped him quickly, IV line in his good arm, monitors beeping softly. Vinny lay on the gurney beside Lily's, watching her small face, pale, flushed with fever, trusting even now. He reached across the narrow space, took her hand. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Lily's eyes fluttered open. Dad, right here, baby girl. She squeezed his fingers, weak but there. Don't be scared, she said. Vinny's throat closed. I'm not scared. I'm proud. They began the transfusion. Vinny felt the pull, slow, steady, like life leaving one body to enter another. Pain flared in his shoulder and his chest in places deeper than flesh. He welcomed it. Let it ground him. Sarah sat between them, holding Lily's other hand, holding Vinny's free one, tears falling without pause. She watched the blood move through the clear tube dark red from father to daughter, and felt something inside her finally give way. Not surrender. Release. The doctor returned after 40 minutes. She's stabilizing. Fever's coming down. The transfusion bought us time. Surgery in 20 minutes. Vinny exhaled a ragged, broken sound. He looked at Lily. She was sleeping now, small chest, rising and falling, color creeping back into her cheeks. He looked at Sarah. She's going to be okay, he said. Sarah nodded. Tears streamed. Because of you. Vinny shook his head. Because of her. She hid the wound so I wouldn't worry. She took the pain so I wouldn't have to carry more. He closed his eyes. Remorse surged again, fiercer now, edged with awe. His child had protected him. The man who had spent a lifetime protecting everyone else had been protected by a 9-year-old girl who loved him enough to bleed in silence. Vinny felt the deepest wound inside him finally begin to close. Not because the pain had vanished, but because love had grown larger than the pain. Sarah leaned across Lily's sleeping form, pressed her lips to Vinny's forehead, soft, steady, certain. Thank you, she whispered, for being her dad. Vinny opened his eyes. Tears stood in them, silent, unashamed. Thank you, he answered, for letting me. Outside, the frost deepened. Inside, a family waited together, unbreakable healing. And in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, Vincent Russo understood at last that redemption was not earned through power. It was given freely, fiercely by a child who refused to let him stay broken. October 2025 ended in Newark under skies the color of old iron, heavy with the promise of snow that never quite arrived. The city moved slower in the final days of the month, shop windows already strung with early holiday lights, breath visible in every exhale, streets emptying earlier each evening. Inside the Ferry Street townhouse, the contrast remained almost painful. Thick drapes drawn against the cold fires, burning low and steady, in every hearth, the faint scent of pine. From a small evergreen missus, Elena had set on the mantel, in anticipation of quieter times ahead. Sarah Thompson still woke before first light body braced for the familiar bite of frost through cracked windows that no longer existed. Heart braced for the moment this fragile piece would prove itself another illusion. Lily had come home from the clinic 3 days earlier, small, pale, but smiling. The surgery had drained the infection. The transfusion had given her strength when her own body had none left to give. She moved gingerly, ribs taped beneath soft cotton pajamas, but the fever had broken and color had returned to her cheeks. She spent most of her hours curled beside Vinny on the wide leather sofa in the parlor, Hoppy tucked under one arm, small hand resting over the fresh scar on his shoulder, as though she could heal him the way he had healed her. Sarah watched them together, father and daughter, finally touching without hesitation, and felt gratitude so deep it bordered on grief. Every time Lily whispered Dad or pressed her cheek to Vinny's chest, Sarah felt the last remnants of her old armor dissolve. She had spent years teaching herself not to hope, not to trust, not to believe in permanence. Now hope lived in her daughter's smile, trust lived in the way Vinny's hand always found Lily's when she reached for him, permanence lived in the quiet certainty of the house around them. Vinny carried the weight of the last week like stones in his chest. The transfusion had left him weak, dizzy spells when he stood too quickly, fatigue that settled into his bones like damp cold. He hid it behind careful movements and long sleeves. He had already begun the final steps of withdrawal from the life territories, signed over accounts. Quietly closed men told to find new paths. Each decision felt like amputating a limb, necessary, agonizing, leaving him lighter and more exposed with every hour. He told himself it was enough. It was not. The blow came at dawn on the last day of October. Vinny woke to the sound of tires on the gravel courtyard, too many, too fast. He rose without waking. Lily pulled on a sweater over the bandages and moved to the window. Federal vehicles, black SUVs with tinted windows, lights flashing but silent, blocked both ends of the street. Agents in dark windbreakers stepped out, vests marked FBI in bold yellow letters. Vinny felt the world narrow to a single cold point. He dressed quickly, dark shirt, dark coat, kissed Lily's forehead while she slept, then went downstairs. Sarah met him in the foyer. Her face was already pale. "They're here," she whispered. Vinny nodded once. "Stay inside. Keep Lily upstairs." She caught his arm. "Vinny, I'll handle it." He stepped outside alone. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s, short-cropped hair, eyes hard approached, with a folded paper in her hand. Vincent Russo, yes. She held up the warrant. You're under arrest. Federal charges: conspiracy to commit kidnapping, multiple counts of extortion, racketeering, witness tampering, among others. Vinny stood motionless. Rain began again, light cold, hissing against the pavement. Inside the house, Sarah watched from the parlor window, Lily pressed against her side. The agents moved forward, cuffs ready. Vinny raised both hands slowly. I'll go peacefully. They spun him against the nearest SUV, patted him down, secured his wrists behind his back. Sarah felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. She clutched Lily tighter. Vinny looked toward the house, once eyes finding Sarah's through the glass. His expression held no fear, only sorrow. Deep, endless sorrow. They placed him in the back seat. The convoy pulled away. Sarah sank to the floor, Lily in her arms. The girl began to cry, soft, broken sounds that tore through Sarah like knives. Mommy, where did they take Dad? Sarah had no answer. She held her daughter and wept. Hours passed in a numb blur. Mrs. Elena brought tea, neither of them drank. Mateo arrived, driven by one of Vinny's remaining loyal men, eyes wide, face streaked with tears. Sarah sat on the parlor rug with both children arms around them, rocking slowly. She felt hollow, numb, as though the world had tilted again and left her falling. Late in the afternoon, her phone rang, an unknown number. She answered with shaking hands. Sarah Thompson, yes. This is Assistant United States Attorney Laura Chen. We need to speak with you urgently. Sarah's heart stuttered. About Vinny, yes. Can you come downtown Federal Building? 1 Federal Plaza. Sarah looked at the children. I have Lily. She's just out of surgery. A pause. Bring her. And the boy, if he's with you. This concerns them too. Sarah felt cold sweat break across her skin. She gathered the children, coats, blankets. Hoppy climbed into the waiting SUV. Vinny's men still guarded. The drive downtown felt endless. The Federal Building was cold, marble floors, metal detectors, agents everywhere. They were led to a small conference room, windowless, fluorescent-lit, two-way mirror on one wall. Assistant Attorney Chen waited inside, mid-40s, dark suit, calm eyes. She gestured to the chairs. Sarah sat. Lily climbed into her lap. Mateo sat beside them, small, fierce, protective. Chen spoke gently. We have Mr. Russo in custody. The charges are serious, but there's a complication. Sarah's voice was barely audible. What complication? Chen slid a tablet across the table. A video file waited. She pressed play. Grainy security footage, hospital corridor the night of Lily's surgery. Lily's small, pale foreline still in her arm, ripping free of the bed, staggering into the hallway in her hospital gown. Vinny handcuffed, surrounded by agents being led toward the elevator. Lily throwing herself between them, small body shielding, her father screaming, "Don't take him. He's my dad. He saved me. Please don't take my dad." The agents froze. Lily clung to Vinny's leg, sobbing, refusing to let go. Vinny, still cuffed, dropped to his knees despite the agents' protests, wrapped his arms around her as best he could. The footage ended. Sarah's tears fell onto Lily's hair. Chen's voice softened. That video went viral within hours. Public pressure is significant. The narrative shifted overnight. The man accused of organized crime became the father who took a bullet for his daughter, who gave blood to save her life, who walked into a warehouse alone to rescue her best friend. Sarah looked up. What does that mean? It means the case is no longer straightforward. The evidence against him is strong, years of wiretaps, financials, witness statements. But the public sees a redemption story. And Lily's plea, Chen paused. It's powerful, unignorable. Sarah's voice trembled. What do you want from us? Chen leaned forward. We're prepared to offer a narrow immunity deal. Full exit from all criminal activity. Witness protection if needed. Clean slate. In exchange, he walks away from everything. No more shadow empire. No more power. Legitimate life only. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. And if he refuses, Chen's expression was kind but firm. Then the case proceeds. And he likely spends the rest of his life in federal prison. Sarah looked down at Lily, small, still fragile, clinging to her. She looked at Mateo, eyes fierce, protective. She thought of Vinny alone in a holding cell, carrying guilt heavier than any sentence. She nodded once. I'll talk to him. They allowed her to see him supervised glass partition between them. Vinny sat on the other side, orange jumpsuit wrists cuffed to the table, eyes hollow but steady. Sarah pressed her palm to the glass. Vinny lifted his own, matched hers through the barrier. Lily, he asked first. Safe. With Mateo. Waiting for you. Vinny closed his eyes. Tears slipped free. Sarah spoke softly. They offered a deal. Immunity. Clean exit. You walk away from everything. Vinny opened his eyes. And if I don't, you stay here. For a long time. Silence stretched, painful, endless. Vinny looked at her, really looked. I never wanted this life for her. For you. I thought power would keep you safe. It almost destroyed everything. Sarah's tears fell. You saved us. Every day since the station. You saved us. Vinny pressed his forehead to the glass close as he could get. I'll take the deal, he whispered. For her, for you, for Mateo, I'll walk away. Sarah's breath caught. Vinny smiled, small, broken, beautiful. Tell Lily I'm coming home. Sarah nodded, tears streaming. I will. She pressed her lips to the glass. Vinny matched the gesture. Outside the room, Lily waited with Mateo, small hands clasped tight. Sarah knelt before them. He's coming home, she said. Lily's face lit up bright, blinding. Mateo's eyes filled. Really? Sarah pulled them both close. Really? Outside, the frost deepened. Inside a small visitation room, a man who had once ruled the shadows chose light. Not because the darkness had lost its pull, but because love had grown stronger. And in that choice, quiet, final, absolute, Vincent Russo found the redemption he had never believed possible. Not through power, through surrender, through family. October 2025 slipped quietly into memory in Newark. The first days of November arrived with tentative sunlight that filtered through bare branches and turned the frost on every surface into fleeting diamonds. The wind still carried a bite, but it no longer felt like punishment. Inside the Ferry Street townhouse, the atmosphere had softened into something almost sacred. Fires burned lower now, not for warmth alone, but for the gentle glow they cast across faces that had learned to smile again. The scent of fresh bread mingled with pine from the small evergreen that remained on the mantel. A quiet promise that seasons change, and so can lives. Sarah Thompson no longer woke before dawn, expecting cold and hunger. She still rose early, habit carved too deeply to vanish overnight, but now she lingered in the doorway of Lily's room, watching her daughter sleep in the soft quilt, small chest rising and falling without fear. The thinness in Lily's cheeks had begun to fill out. The shadows beneath her eyes had faded. Sarah touched her own arms, sometimes marveling at skin no longer stretched tight over bone, at hands that did not bleed from endless bleach and cold water. The memory of nights spent huddled under a single blanket while wind howled through cracked windows still lived inside her, sharp and humiliating, but it no longer defined every breath. Lily moved through the house with new confidence, small feet no longer hesitant on the polished floors, voice no longer dropping to a whisper when asking for more food. She left drawings everywhere, one taped to the refrigerator showing 4 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright sun. Another slipped under Vinny's pillow with the words, Dad plus Mom plus Mateo plus me equals family written, in careful crayon letters. Each picture felt like a claim staked on permanence, and Sarah watched her daughter make those claims with a mixture of awe and quiet terror. She had spent so many years teaching Lily how to survive loss that she had almost forgotten how to teach her how to hope. Vinny had kept his promise. The handover was complete by the middle of November, territories signed over under careful legal cover, accounts closed or redirected into legitimate construction contracts, men quietly released with severance generous enough to buy silence, and new beginnings. He kept only what could stand in daylight, a small firm specializing in rebuilding low-income housing in the Central Ward and ironbound projects funded through grants and private investment rather than shadow money. The power he had once wielded like armor had been dismantled piece by piece, leaving him lighter, more exposed, and for the first time in decades almost at peace. He still woke in the night sometimes, heart pounding from dreams of warehouses and gunshots and small hands reaching for him in the dark. But now when he woke, Lily was often already there, slipping into his room with Hoppy, climbing onto the bed without asking, pressing her small body against his side until his breathing steadied. Each time she did it, the guilt that had once threatened to drown him receded a little further. Not gone, never entirely gone, but no longer the only voice inside his head. One Saturday morning in mid-November, sunlight slanted through the parlor windows and turned the hardwood floors to gold. Vinny sat at the kitchen table with paperwork spread before him, final signatures on the housing project that would break ground in the spring. Lily climbed onto the chair beside him, resting her chin on his arm. "What's that, Dad?" He smiled, small, real. "Houses for people who need them, like we used to need one." Lily traced a finger over the blueprints. "Will they have warm beds?" "Yes. And hot chocolate every day if they want it." She looked up at him, eyes the same blue as his, now bright with certainty. "You're making the world better." Vinny's throat tightened. He pulled her onto his lap, careful of her healing side. "You're the one who made me better, baby girl." Sarah watched from the doorway, coffee mug forgotten in her hands. She saw the way Vinny's shoulders relaxed when Lily leaned against him, saw the way his hand always found the small of her back as though afraid she might disappear. She felt the same pull in her own chest, the overwhelming burning surge of love that had begun the moment he took that bullet on the path platform and had only grown fiercer with every day since. Mateo sat at the far end of the table, coloring a dragon with fierce concentration. He had moved in permanently 2 weeks earlier, grandmother's hospice care, fully funded legal guardianship papers signed without fanfare. The boy no longer flinched at sudden movements. He no longer ate as though every bite might be taken away. When he looked at Vinny now, the wariness had softened into something closer to trust. Sarah crossed the room, set her mug down, slid into the chair beside Vinny. He looked at her eyes, soft, unguarded. She reached across the table, took his hand. "We're okay," she said quietly. Vinny turned his palm up, threaded his fingers through hers. "We are." Lily looked between them then at Mateo. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. "Family," she said simply. Mateo nodded, once small, certain. Vinny felt something inside him finally settle, not the end of pain, but the beginning of its opposite. Later that afternoon, they walked to the nearby park, first time all 4 of them together outside the gates. Lily and Mateo ran ahead, kicking fallen leaves, laughter rising like music against the cold air. Sarah walked beside Vinny, their hands still linked. She spoke softly. "I never thought I'd have this." Vinny looked down at her. "Neither did I." She stopped, turned to face him. "You gave us everything," she said. "And you didn't have to." Vinny shook his head. "You gave me everything I didn't know I could still have." He lifted their joined hands, pressed his lips to her knuckles, gentle, reverent. Sarah felt tears rise again, not from grief this time, but from fullness. They watched the children chase each other across the grass, Lily's laughter bright, Mateo's grin fierce and free. Vinny spoke quietly. "I spent years thinking love was a weakness, that it could be used against me, that it had already destroyed me once." He looked at Sarah, really looked. "I was wrong." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Love isn't weakness. It's the only thing strong enough to heal what power never could." Vinny nodded, slow, certain. They walked on. That evening, after dinner, after baths, after stories, Vinny sat on the edge of Lily's bed. She was already half asleep, Hoppy tucked under her chin. "Dad, yes, baby girl. Promise you won't go away." Vinny leaned down, kissed her forehead. "I promise." She smiled, sleepy, trusting. "I love you." Vinny's voice cracked. "I love you too, more than anything." He stayed until her breathing evened out. In the hallway, Sarah waited. They stood together in the soft light, 2 people who had both known despair so deeply they had almost forgotten how to hope. Sarah spoke first. "We're going to be okay." Vinny pulled her close, gentle, fierce. "Yes, we are." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, quiet, steady, covering the city in white. Inside, a family slept, wounds, healing hearts open, future no longer something to survive, but something to build. And in the stillness between heartbeats, Vincent Russo understood at last that the greatest strength was not power. It was love, fierce, unconditional, colorblind. Wealth and poverty could never separate compassion when compassion chose to stay. Knowledge matters because it teaches us to see beyond appearances. Lesson after lesson in this story reminds us that true education begins in the heart. Knowledge shows us how one act of courage can change everything. Lesson upon lesson reveals that compassion knows no color, no class, no boundary. Education of the soul teaches us that love heals what money never could. Knowledge opens our eyes to the humanity in everyone. Lesson after lesson proves that real strength lies in protecting the vulnerable. Education of empathy reminds us that no one is invisible when seen with love. Knowledge and education together guide us toward a life of deeper meaning. To everyone watching this video, I wish you good health, a joyful life, and daily peace. May your days be filled with kindness and your nights with rest. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. We post engaging stories every day, stories about hope, healing, and the quiet power of love. Tell me in the comments, how did this story make you feel? Does it connect to anything in your own life? Share your thoughts, your emotions, your own moments of seeing someone truly deep within your heart. I read every comment and I listen. Thank you for being here. Goodbye for now, and I promise I'll see you again in the next video. Disclaimer: all stories on this channel are fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.